Welcome to No Tracers. This episode is one of my favorite episodes. I'm just giving you forewarning. So if you're new to the show, hit subscribe and enjoy the entire episode. Let's get into it. Step into the world of decay, abandonment, and chaos. The story of an urban explorer starts here, at the beginning. Welcome to the podcast you've been looking for all along. This is No Tracers. Here, we take only photos. We leave only footprints. And remember, leave no trace. Hi there, my name is Kay, just the letter K. I'm known as No Tracers. You can find me on Instagram, No Tracers, no.tracers rather. TikTok, No Tracers. YouTube is No Tracers Urbex. I'm going to be starting to post more of the podcasts on my YouTube channel going forward. I just have been traveling all year on tour with different bands, my own band, as well as freelancing and traveling around the world. I just got home from Switzerland actually a couple days ago and wanted to jump right back into recording podcasts with people. And this week, I am so excited to share this episode with you because my guest is such a great storyteller. Today, I am talking to Blake of All American Ruins. He's got a radio show, he's got a podcast, and he works with a nonprofit called the TMI Project. We'll be talking about all these things throughout this podcast, but he's such a good storyteller, and I'm very, very excited for you to hear this episode. If you are new to the podcast, like I said at the beginning, please hit the subscribe button. If you've been listening for any amount of time, I would really appreciate it if you would leave a rating and feedback, especially if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It helps us grow. It helps more people just like you find this podcast, and it helps our statistics. You know, it's always good to, have good stats, and I'm an analytics whore, if you will. I love analytics. I love studying them and figuring out what works, what doesn't work. So if you could leave a rating and feedback, that would help me out. It would also help me know what you like or don't like about the show and what I can change and improve on. So critical feedback is always appreciated. This show is all about urban exploring. If you're new and have no idea what's going on here, the show is about exploring abandoned places. I've also started having some rooftopers on. So we're going into the full realm of urban exploring now, not just abandoned places. So I'm super excited to be expanding what No Tracers is about and the guests that I'm having featured on this show. It's very exciting for me. I do want to take a second to thank our partner on this podcast, Liquid Death Mountain Water. If you've never heard of Liquid Death, well, hey, I've got a new ad for you. In 3, 2, 1. The scariest water on the planet that is not for the faint of heart is Liquid Death Mountain Water. Its creators signed a deal with the devil to bring you water from the Austrian Alps. Still, sparkling and flavored water is now available at liquiddeath.com. Use code JustTheLetterK for 10% off. Liquid Death, not for the faint of heart. So if you guys want to get 10% off your order at liquiddeath.com, go to liquiddeath.com and use code JustTheLetterK. You can get a case of water, and I think you have to order a set of koozies with your water in order for the discount code to be applied to your order. So make sure you do that. The link is down below. If you want to click on it, it will automatically apply that coupon code. Thank you guys for supporting me, and thank you to Liquid Death for partnering with the No Tracers podcast. Last thing I need to let you know about is that there is some new merchandise at notracers.com/shop. If you guys want to pick up a hoodie, a beanie, hats, duffel bags for your props that you bring into abandoned places to do your photo shoots, I've got cool duffel bags that I designed. I'm working on something really cool in 2023 that I'm not going to talk about yet because I don't want anyone to steal my idea. But just know it's a really cool piece of gear that you are going to love. And I'm going to love making. I'm super stoked about it. And I also have 2 photography books about urban exploring out. No Tracers, An Urban Explorer's Diary was my first book. It's about my stories and my photos. It's a coffee table book. And the second one is also a coffee table book called How to Explore Abandoned Buildings. It's full of tips and tricks for exploring. And I teamed up with an illustrator in Portugal that goes by Mr. Sketch, Cursed Sketchbook. He is an illustrator and he drew on top of my photos to illustrate these tips and tricks. It's a super cool book. Please go check it out. Without further ado, Blake, please introduce yourself and how long you've been exploring to the No Tracers audience.
Hey, my name is Blake, and I'm the creator of All American Ruins. I've been exploring abandoned spaces technically since I was about 6 years old, starting with an abandoned dairy farm down the hill from the house that I grew up in the mountains in Colorado.
So take me into that first exploration because, I too explored as a kid. I used to go out in the woods with my brothers and just kind of explore back there. And we came across some like abandoned house furniture, things like that. So that's kind of like what initially got me hooked, but I didn't even know about like urban exploring until much, much later in life. So for you, like take me into that first exploration into that dairy farm and like what you experienced there.
Yeah, that first exploration at the dairy farm was mesmerizing. It was formerly run by a nunnery that was also in the neighborhood I grew up in, Mount St. Francis, and it was if it had been raptured. It had everything inside of it, and when I found the way in, my father had taken my brother and I to go see the outside of the property, but being a double Sagittarius rising and moon, I have a bit of the breaking the rules exploration built into my system. And I figured out a way into the building and the house specifically. I could not believe what I was seeing. I felt like I had literally time traveled. There were dishes on the table, clothes in the closet, furniture everywhere. I just couldn't believe it. It looked truly like the folks had been raptured and everything was left. And I felt this unreal, undeniable sense of connection to something that was a time and place that wasn't mine. And I didn't quite understand what the feeling was back then, but I knew that it was magical. And I became, I guess I would say, addicted to that magic and went back as often as I could.
So, as you went back over time, did you see it decay further? Did things start to disappear as people came in and like took things? Like, tell me about the process of like watching that place further decay and fall apart.
It was so protected that many people, I would say a majority of people, even in my own neighborhood, didn't know that there was a way inside. And so, with that particular space, I didn't watch a lot of decay. And I remember, even at that age, thinking to myself that it felt off and felt wrong to take anything
Mm.
or to destroy anything. And so this was almost like a museum piece in a way. Then fast forward to a fire that started, a mysterious fire. We were in a neighborhood that was part of a neighborhood association, very uppity, stuck up white America, and they had always wanted this dairy farm to go away so that they could build this horrific set of condos.
Mm.
And I remember that fire. Well, actually, I don't really remember that fire as much as my mom does, and she reminded me of it. And we went to watch it as a family go up in flames, and the
Wow.
remnants were eventually bulldozed over, and they built these just disgusting looking condos that don't even really fit the landscape of the Colorado mountains. They look like they belong in the Mediterranean. And it was depressing. It was very sad. And it wasn't just because, this gorgeous secret structure where I was able to go play pretend and talk to ghosts and learn how to activate
Mm.
my imagination was destroyed, but because the stories that were inside the walls there were also just gone. It was like nobody cared about them. And I talked to my mom about this a lot, and just the sense of sadness that comes with that because, we're on this planet for a short amount of time. And I think that so many stories go untold. And that sort of seemed to serve as a symbol of those stories just being completely erased. They weren't necessarily stories that we knew, but it was a place that had people who lived there and they worked there and they lived lives there, and then it was just gone, which was very sad.
It's interesting. You talked about like the mysterious aspect of that fire, and I don't want to like claim anything, but there are currently some properties, mainly that I've heard about in like the Detroit area,
Hmm.
that are mysteriously catching on fire after the police catch people in these places. And so it makes me wonder if the authorities are doing this or somebody on the inside is doing this to remove these properties so that they can, like you said, put these hideous condos in their place.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart, it breaks my heart anytime something is destroyed or catches on fire or is, set on fire, if you will, because these places, I feel like we as urban explorers cherish them.
Yeah, the word cherish is so appropriate. And I don't disagree, that may be well informed conjecture, but it's well informed conjecture that you're posing here. And I think that we, just to connect us to the bigger picture, this is a very greedy capitalistic society that we find ourselves in. And particularly now, there seems to be this great fight for space, and
Mm.
the people who have more money can buy more space and take up more space. And I think, one of the things that I've so loved and appreciated about sort of being welcomed and ushered into the urbex community is this respect for history and this respect for these buildings that exist, not just as playgrounds for us to poke around and really pass the time and activate our imaginations, but as monuments to a history and people that came before us and the stories that they lived. It's very humbling, and I agree with you. I think that these mysterious fires that you talk about in Detroit, there's actually nothing really mysterious about them at all. It seems to be exactly what the 30% of this country is going for. Um, and I find that, as you said, to be terribly sad and so selfish. These buildings could, if you're gonna do something with them, make them places where people can live. The unhoused population in this country is massive, and it's a serious problem all over the country. It does not matter what rural, suburban, or urban neighborhood you're in, unhoused populations, it's horrific. And so I just don't find any merit, not only in getting rid of these buildings, but the way that they do it, the destructive nature of setting fire to something like that. It's I guess my body and my brain and my spirit just don't think that way. And so it's yeah, it is. It's terribly sad.
Yeah, and the you talk about like restoring these buildings for the people that don't have anywhere to live. I didn't realize this was a problem and or a solution until about 2017, when I lived in California. I started exploring some bigger places out there, and for example, there was a 17-story abandoned hospital,
Mm.
and I spent about 4 hours walking around this place with my friend, and I was like, there's, like, medical supplies still in there. They literally left everything, gurneys, disinfectants, everything is left inside this building, and I'm walking around wondering, like, why isn't anyone living here? Like, why is this building not being repurposed for the greater good? Because California, Los Angeles is notorious for the homeless population there and how rampant it is, and they're just living on tents and on the side of the road, and people are allowing this to happen, and it's a horrible thing that our society has kind of disregarded them, especially those that are like mentally ill that used to be housed in places like asylums where we now explore these more than pretty much any other kind of building because there's so many abandoned asylums because all those people got thrown out on the streets and are not taken care of anymore. And so for those that are like listening to this podcast that want to get into restoration, it is something that you can do. I just reached out. I saw a post on Instagram. I live in Tennessee in Nashville, and I caught wind of this amazing mansion that is going to be demolished, but it's a piece of history. Like Tim McGraw lived there, like a bunch of country stars lived in this house, and I wish that there was a way to save it, and turns out that there is. They're actually starting a petition to save this mansion and get it listed as like a historical landmark. And so I'm now in contact with the main person that's associated with it. So hopefully I can get them on the show and talk about more about restoring these properties and repurposing them. And hopefully that leads to being able to do more things with, restoring buildings and allowing people to live in them that need a place to live. For you, so you started exploring as a kid. What made you keep going back? Like what drew you into this aside from like the history and the adventure?
It was this sense of belonging. I wish I could explain it better. It was something that sparked in my spirit. I have always been I was really lucky that I grew up with parents who really forged the way for me and curated an environment for me to explore my imagination as much as possible. And I think because I was raised in that kind of household and encouraged to use my imagination, that going into a place that you could literally make up however many possible stories that could have existed in there come alive. It was magical. It was pure magic, and kind of like I mentioned earlier, there was almost an addictive quality to it. And I think uh, I did a lot of reflecting on this experience as a kid when the pandemic started, which is sort of what reignited the fire of my interest in these kinds of places and exploring them. There was a sense of safety in them, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and most people look at me like cockeyed and think that I'm bananas, because a lot of these places are condemned and it can be very dangerous. I've fallen through floorboards on second, third stories of schools and hospitals, and um, as physically dangerous as it may be, I feel safer inside these spaces than anywhere else in the world, because we're living in such a remarkably dangerous and hateful time, and to have a space to escape reality for a little bit and get whisked away back in time and to go play pretend, even as a 35-year-old man, um, I can't think of anything else better to do with my time than to do that. We're here, I mentioned this, once on this planet, and I'm not interested in engaging with society in ways that are harmful. Um, I'm interested in engaging with the planet in ways that pique my imagination and allow me to be creative and to see as much of this strange little rock, orbiting through the universe as possible.
Yeah, and I think that what you talked about when you said that the world kind of shuts off when we go into these places. I think that that's something that only explorers understand. And it's something I've talked about before on the podcast. Like when we walk into these places, it seems like the world vanishes and that building is the only thing in existence. And it's such a magical thing. It's like you're walking into a portal into the past.
Yeah, exactly. And I have so many friends of mine who aren't necessarily explorers, but they express to me how much they wish they could go, but there's this sense of fear because we
Sure.
live in a society that has established these guidelines, quote unquote, and these rules, quote unquote, and I just have never been very good at following those rules. I um I just find there to be so much more joy in kind of coloring outside of the lines,
Yeah.
than being told that I have to stay in them in order to make something look beautiful.
Absolutely. So, do you have now that you've been exploring for some time, do you have a certain type of building that you prefer to explore over anything else? Is it houses or hospitals? Like, do you have a specific building that's a favorite?
Ah, that's such a great question. One of the things that consistently amazes me about any of the spaces that I go to is the artwork that has been created on the walls of any of these places. And so I am particularly drawn to places that have been sort of transformed into a piece of art. There
Mm,
is, I can give an example. There's a house um, that is in the Mid Hudson Valley, up right at the foot of the Catskill Mountains. And it's a four-story house that sits on a property that once housed a drive-in movie theater. And this house has been um, it's been transformed into this artistic monument to the climate activist Greta Thunberg. And I remember when I went to this place the first time, and I walked around to the front, and there was just this giant message with flames coming out of the side, just like these huge painted flames that someone had affixed to the side of the house coming out the sides. Like, look, these flames looked like they were coming out the window, and there was a giant message that said, "Panic like the house is on fire." And I remember thinking,
Wow.
what song from the 80s is this lyric from? And so I googled that phrase, and this video popped up of Greta Thunberg giving some speech at a convention, and she says, "I want you to panic like the house is on fire." And
Wow.
then I looked up from my phone, and there was an old marquee that had once been sitting on the side of the road, welcoming patrons to the drive-in movie theater back in the 50s. And somebody had just taken that same spray paint, the same fiery color, and just written Greta Thunberg on it. And I went into the house, and all of these different climate messages were painted on the sides. It was gorgeous. It was absolutely gorgeous. So to answer your question, any place that has been transformed into something artistic, that's what I'm the most drawn to. I know a lot of people love this idea of, like I mentioned earlier, a raptured place, or a place that might be really creepy and have gadgets from a 1930s psychiatric institution. And that stuff is cool, but it's the places that have been transformed by artists. And it doesn't have to just be you know graffiti or spray painted work. I've seen some of the most gorgeous dances choreographed in these spaces. I've
Mm.
seen amazing parkour that's been captured in these spaces. And then, of course, some of the most unbelievable videography and photography. So I guess this is just to say that any space that elicits artistic brilliance, that's really what I'm the most interested in.
Amazing. Amazing. Wow, I'm never going to get that quote out of my head. Panic like the house is on fire.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
wow.
it's I have to say that space in particular, I had this the first time I explored it, most remarkable experience. I walked up. So when you walk into the house, at the bottom there's a the garage is sort of on the backside of the house, and it's in the basement. And when I walked up to it, I realized someone had taken hundreds and hundreds of paint cans and created a maze that you had to walk through in order to get into the house.
Wow.
And so, immediately walking into this panic like the house is on fire, like underneath that quote, these flames coming out of the sides, these paint cans, I was already transported to something that was, deeply spiritual for me. Art is a
Sure.
spiritual experience for me. Um, and when I walked upstairs, I got to the third floor, and I turned a corner, and a bird flew out of a room almost as if it was waiting for me to get there, and it flew directly towards my head. It was coming for me, almost as if to say, actually, you're not welcome here today. And then it I had to duck, and it missed my head, and I continued, and I turned into this bedroom, and there was this second bird, which I surmised to be this other bird's partner, flying in circles around the room. And I glanced at the wall on the right, and someone oh my god, I get emotional thinking about it. Somebody had spray painted, "I love you more and more each day." And instantly I had this imagined fantasy of this elderly couple who had once lived there
Oh.
and run this drive-in movie theater, and their spirits had gone into these new bodies as
Mm.
birds, and someone knew that had happened and recreated their love story just by saying, "I love you more and more each day." I mean, if
Wow.
that's not a magical experience that can absolve my depression for a few days, then I don't know what is.
Yeah. Wow. That's absolutely magical, and the way you tell these stories is beautiful. You have a great way of storytelling and painting this amazing picture that you're experiencing. Um, for you, like, let's talk about we're talking about creativity and art here. What has been your most creative entrance into one of these buildings?
Mm, it's such a good question. When I first started, slowly, because the urbex community is pretty particular and
Yes.
very careful about how things are done. And it's because everyone in this community is a protector of sorts. And so at first I didn't quite understand it, but then as I started to really immerse myself in the world, I understood it. And so as I started, going through and seeing all of these different ways that art was being created in these spaces, I asked myself, I'm not really a photographer, I'm not really a videographer, but I am a writer and a storyteller and an orator, and that's what I love to do. And so it dawned on me that as I was entering each of these spaces, my imagination was truly setting on fire. And so many things were happening, so many fantasies running through my head, just like when I was a kid. And so I think the first time that it happened to me was the first space I explored when the pandemic started, which is an abandoned military base up like 2 hours north of my house in the Hudson Valley. And the second that I rolled under that fence and stood up and walked into the gatehouse that was at the front of the property, it I I don't even know how to explain it to you. It was like my body got lifted, and just, like, picked up and carried to this other time and place. Um, and since then, every time I go in, it's a different experience. There was a school down on the eastern shores of Virginia that I got to explore, and it was one of those accidental moments where you're driving on a county highway just keeping to yourself, and all of a sudden this 3-story art deco works progress administration building just appears on the horizon, and you sort of screech around, flip a U-turn. But I remember pulling around to the back of that building and looking up and just seeing this giant hole in the side of the building, and I could see the blackboard on the side of one of the walls in the classroom, and it was truly like this little phantom appeared, and I could see this teacher talking to her class and giving that day's history lesson on the local community. Um, and then, of course, I look down and I see written directly underneath this magical thing that I was, conjuring in my head, just the words sex, drugs, depression written in giant letters on the side of the building. I don't know even how to answer your question. It's so different every time, and each one is so different. Um, but those are the two that kind of stick out to me.
Amazing. And how about your scariest exploration?
That same school.
Same school?
Yeah, that same school in that exact room, actually, with the hole in the wall. When I went up to the second floor, I had been told by one of my first urbex friends early on, stick to the sides of the rooms if you're
Yeah.
unsure about the floorboards in the center. That's usually a safer bet. Try to find the beams in the floor. And I was just so mesmerized, and my imagination was going so crazy that I wasn't looking where I was going. And all of a sudden, I was plummeting through the floor, um, down into what I wound up finding out subsequently was one of the bathrooms in the cafeteria. And I luckily, as my waist hit the floor, I was able to catch myself with my arms, and I could just feel this, weightlessness and dangling over this, very it was a long drop. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, so we have a new rule. We don't go to second stories without another friend, at least, and we stick to the sides of the room. So I think that might be the scariest. But there was also a resort that I explored in Pennsylvania, and when I arrived, I was the only person there. And when I left, I rolled under the fence. This resort is split into two sides, divided by this highway. And I rolled under the fence, and there were like 12 cars there, and all these people. This was right, when the pandemic was really in its first heat wave,
Mhm.
and so many people were, I think, discovering this joy.
Yeah.
And right as I got to my car and put the key into the lock and unlocked it, I heard sirens. And as I got into my car, 4 cop cars, like you would have thought there had been like a triple homicide or something, the number
Wow.
of cops that showed up. And I went to turn the ignition, and then all of a sudden there was a cop knocking on my window, and I rolled down the window, and he was like, "Were you just in there?" And it was interesting. I was scared, but then it was like somebody, like a ghost possessed me, and I was very cool and calm, and I was like, "Oh no, man, I'm sorry. I just pulled over to send a text. I didn't want to text and drive." And so that was pretty scary
Brilliant.
too. Um, there was also a time I've been reprimanded twice now. And the second time was very recently at an abandoned children's camp up also in the Catskill Mountains. And the caretaker of that property figured out that me and my friend were in the space, and I actually have an audio recording of him screaming at us. But he was like 6'4", like in his late 60s, early 70s, definitely had been living in this very rural area for a long, long, long time. Probably didn't see a lot of people, and he was very, very angry. And I remember thinking to myself, this man might have a gun, and this might be my final day on this planet. But then, as maybe like a minute into his spiel, and he was dropping the F word every other word, and just so angry, I realized, oh, this man is lonely, and he just wants someone to yell at. I have nothing to be afraid of. As long as I'm kind to him, I'll be fine. So yeah, those are a couple of the scary experiences I can say.
And if you can send me that audio bit, I'm actually gonna put it in right here.
No question. I will absolutely send it to you. It's really magnificent. And actually, what's so interesting, this is just like a total side note and like a comment on the cultural climate that we're in. I was with a queer friend of mine, and we're both queer, but she's married to a woman, and I'm dating a man. And the dude, and you'll hear it in the recording, but the dude was like, and I don't know who he is to talking to my friend. He was like, I don't know who he is to you. I don't know if he's your boyfriend or whatever the fuck. I couldn't give a fuck. And just it was so weird that he had to make that statement. Um, and I kind of cocked my head and I was like, "Girl, you have something to tell us?"
Oh my god, amazing. The experiences we have and the people we meet at these places, it's always fascinating. I've heard stories on this podcast about cops showing up and actually giving a tour of the place.
Yep.
So you never really know what's going to happen with these people. It's just kind of like a roll of the dice who you're going to run into. But I'm glad
Hmm.
you were safe and okay in that situation, regardless of being yelled at by a strange man. But
Yeah, yeah, it was interesting too. Once he was done screaming at us, and once we fake deleted our photos because,
yes.
he was older and he didn't know that there was a deleted folder. Um we got on our cars, he got in his, and then he followed us. And I was like, "Nah, man, there's no way that this joker is going to follow me today. Like, we did what he said. Now I'm pissed." So I yanked off the road to a gas station. He yanked in with me, and I got out of my car and I was about to go over and be like, "Yo, bro, back off." And when he got out of his car, he had this look of just like pure sadness and
Mm,
apology written all over his face. And he went on to explain to, first of all, he didn't apologize, but he was like, "You understand why I had to do that, right? You get it. Like, it's my job. Like, you get me, right?" And I immediately was like, "Oh, okay, so this guy felt bad, and so that's why he followed us."
wow.
But then he proceeded to tell us about another abandoned location and like showed us how to get there. It
Stop.
was amazing. It was totally
Oh my,
amazing.
what a guy. What a
Yeah,
guy.
what a guy.
What a guy. What a character. Wow. That's an incredible experience that you must have had. Has anything ever made you want to stop exploring? Like, have you ever had an experience that was just like so ridiculous that you were like, maybe I should take a break for a second?
Huh. Yeah, it's interesting. So The way that I sort of found my own voice within the community was to create these immersive audio experiences on my podcast, which is called Abandoned, the All American Ruins podcast. And I, spend a lot of time curating these soundscapes to actually bring people into the spaces with me as I'm narrating what's going on inside my imagination, while also making comments on culture and American history and just the general American social landscape at the current juncture. Um, and a couple months ago, I kind of hit a wall where I was overworked, and each episode takes about 55 hours to produce, soup to nuts, because they're very complicated soundscapes. And I just hit this wall where I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is too much work. And so I did for I'd say like about a month or so, really become um, almost like abhorrent to the work that I had been doing, and sort of like I don't know, just irritable towards abandoned spaces and just the community in general. But I think I was honestly just tired and overworked. There was another experience where I did almost call it quits when it was the other time that I got yelled at. Someone called the cops on a friend of mine and I because they had seen us enter a space, because people don't have anything better than to do than call cops. And the cops, I they they were just there outside waiting for us, and they kept threatening my friend who is a person of color, and I was very cognizant of this whole thing. And I got so pissed that this experience was happening because I knew exactly what was going on, and had to keep inserting myself into the conversation because he was somehow weirdly focused on my friend, who, by the way, it was his first time ever exploring a space
Mm.
and his last. Um, and I remember leaving that experience and being like, to hell with it. If authority is going to exert that much control on a very, very innocent thing that I'm doing here, then I might as well find something else to do. And then, of course, like 24 hours later, I was back exploring an abandoned mansion, like right down the road. So,
Yeah, it's, those experiences definitely shake us up, and I've had a couple of those myself, and I think we can all agree that people take things too far when it comes to the catching us and reprimanding us and that kind of thing. Especially if we're just taking photos, or just exploring. I think it's an innocent thing, and we love doing it. And I mean, if the building's just gonna sit there, I'm gonna go inside. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, they just gotta realize that that's what's happening.
yeah, it's like my grandmother used to say, if the sidewalk's there, I'm going to put my feet on it.
For sure.
And and this I will say, to sort of flip the script a little bit here. There are, like in every community, bad apples,
Sure.
and I have seen destructive behavior, and I have seen people taking things out of the spaces.
Mhm.
And I'm not here to tell anybody what to do or what not to do, but it has always been a rule, and I think I mentioned this early in our chat, that I never take anything, I don't destroy anything, and that's just how I feel about it. This is a hobby and a pastime of respect and of protection. And so I understand why a couple bad apples may have created sort of a bad reputation for the rest of us, but like, come on, most of us are going in to take pictures, most of
Yeah.
us are going in to explore and pass the time.
Mhm.
um because what else are we supposed to do? Not,
Yeah.
like this giant 130 building psychiatric facility in the middle of nowhere is just sitting there, and you want me to not go in?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, we'll see
Cool.
about that.
Yeah.
Um, what do you do when you're not exploring abandoned places?
I work 9 to 5 in a at a nonprofit here in the Hudson Valley called TMI Project. We are a true storytelling organization, and we teach everyday folks like you and me how to tell their own personal true stories. We're specifically looking for the parts of people's stories that are the TMI parts of people's
Mm,
stories. That's the name of the organization, which are the parts that people usually leave out because they're ashamed or embarrassed. And we find that those parts of the stories are what really foster community connection and create an understanding between, everyday folks. And what sort of has been so interesting about the work, I've been working there for just over 5 years full time now, and all of our work really falls under four different social justice focus areas. And so it's been cool because it's not just a literary or a performing arts organization. We are also very much a social justice organization who has partnered with, I can't even tell you how many wonderful institutions and organizations and groups across the country really pushing progressive narratives. Um, because the foundation of every social justice movement is storytelling.
yeah.
And so, our stories fall under these four focus areas: racial justice, gender equity, LGBTQIA plus rights, and mental health awareness.
Wow.
Um, and then I also host a weekly radio program on Radio Kingston WKNY here in the Hudson Valley. It's called the File, and it's a show that invites intergenerational conversations. So that's what I do.
That's amazing.
Can I pause? I'm gonna
Yeah.
lose power here. Let
Oh,
me
okay.
just plug in
For sure.
because
Yeah, you're good.
that would suck. Oh my god! If this happens, I'll die.
It's okay. It'll be saved if anything happens, so we should be fine.
Oh, the
Yes, the
mighty power
sound of
sound.
the sound of life. Be
Okay, we're
with
good.
us. Okay, cool. So for just out of curiosity, if people do want to maybe get involved with the things you're doing with the TMI project, where can they go to find more information about that?
Yeah, so if you just go to tmiproject.org, we have all of the information on how to get involved. Because of the pandemic, we had to move a lot of our work into the virtual stratosphere.
Sure.
And lo and behold, found that, at a time of great isolation, people were craving human connection. And that's what
Mm.
our work fosters. So yeah, go to tmiproject.org. And if you're interested in learning more about Radio Kingston, you can just go to radiokingston.org to check out more about my show there.
Amazing. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So if you could live in one abandoned place that you've explored for an entire week, which place would it
Hmm.
be?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's so interesting that my instinct isn't to go to a house. Actually, that's not true. That's the biggest lie I've ever told today. There was uh, there was an abandoned like a gravekeeper's shanty um, out in the Outer Banks of North Carolina that I visited back in April of 2021. And again, it was one of those places that I just sort of happened upon. But this place was like stuck in the 1950s, man. It was like the telephone on the wall had the rotary, the refrigerator really looked like it had been ripped out of a General Electric commercial from the 50s. Um, so that place sticks. It's interesting that whole week. There were all of these accidental finds. So I'd say that place was pretty cool because it just, it overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. It was gorgeous and it was right next to this huge graveyard. And that's just like another thing that I love. I'm so obsessed with graveyards. But
Hmm.
simply, I guess the other place I would choose if I could choose two, I know you asked for one, but I'm going to choose two, um, was an abandoned water park on that same trip that I found also on the Outer Banks. I love theme parks. I've always been a theme park fan, abandoned or not.
Yeah.
And this place was special because it was kitschy, and I could tell that when it was active, it was a very friendly place that created a lot of good memories for families.
Mm. Yeah, it's always cool, you know, theme parks and water parks to look back in Google Archives and find the photos of when it was open, and then go now
Mm,
and see what it's like now. I love that. That's like one of my favorite things about abandoned theme parks and water parks is that you can look back and see those like happy family photos and people playing in the water or on the rides, you know, things like that, playing games, and just to like walk around the and it's like completely silent. You know, it's just
mm,
quite the juxtaposition, and I still feel like even in those moments I am transported back in those and into that time, even if it's just for a moment, you know, just to kind of relive those footsteps and to see, you know, there's a spot out in California that's like very well known, a water park out there, and when you walk off the road, you can just like step over this like these two logs that they've just kind of stacked, right, to keep people out or to keep cars out. But you walk through the parking lot to get to the water park, and there's still the blue handicapped lines like for the
mm,
handicap parking on the road, and you're immediately just like transported back into the time that that water park was open. And unfortunately they've dismantled all the slides, so there's not really like a whole lot to do there or see, but it's still cool to like walk back into the past. And I think that's one of the things that I love most about exploring abandoned places is that, like we've talked about throughout this podcast, is that we're walking into these time capsules and these portals into another time that not a lot of people get to explore. um, for you, what do you hope for the future of urban exploring?
that it perpetuates this. I always picture in 100 years, if my house is
Mm,
abandoned for whatever reason and I am a ghost in the house, and somebody just like me finds a way to get into the house and respectfully explores and does exactly what I do, um, that would be my hope. I hope that generations of people to come continue to show interest and really trust their gut in wanting to go explore these kinds of places. And then I think the other thing I would say is, if there are places that are up for being demolished, that people just stop setting them on fire,
yeah.
and that if we truly do need to demolish a building, or they're looking to demolish it, that folks, really smart folks, people way smarter than me, urban planners and architects, can go in and try to figure out a way to preserve it, because it happens all the time,
Yeah.
and it creates safe places for people who may not have places to live, kind of like we discussed. Um, to live. So I think those would be the two things. Also, actually no, that's not true. The other thing is, I'd love to see just the word urbex become like an official artistic term or artistic medium, similar to how parkour or
Mm-hmm.
dance have become official terms for artistic mediums. I think urban exploration truly is an artistic form, and there's a way to do it, and there's a spirit behind it, and not everyone is good at it. So I'd love to see that sort of become something more official. I'm sure there's a lot of urbexers out there who are going to slap my hand for saying that, because part of the beauty of this community is the subtlety and
Yeah.
the under the radarness. But I am all about creating equity, and creating equitable spaces. And honestly, that includes the Urbex community. I think the more people who can understand the joy of what we do, the better.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And my last question for you is, what is something you know now that you wish you knew when you started exploring?
Jeez Louise. Something I know. Oh, that's a great question. Don't do not set expectations when you are given intel on a
Mm,
place, because you might show up and it might be gone.
yeah.
There was an abandoned women's prison in Broward County, Florida, that I had hyped myself up that I was going to get to go visit. I mean, just hyped myself up. And there, with all the research that I had done leading up to going, none of them none of the things that I had read online said that, oh, we demolished this and now
Oh,
it's a warehouse for IKEA.
oh
And
no,
of course,
no.
yeah, it was really gutting. So that's what I would say. Don't set high expectations when you're going out to find a place, because it often is the case that it's no longer there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on No Tracers and sharing your stories and your insight with everybody here, and a little bit about what you do and your backstory. It's been a pleasure to chat with you today. If people want to keep following your journey, let them know where they can find you online to follow your photography, your explorations, and your life.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I know how to take a photograph and tell a story with one, but I would never call myself a photographer. But I am an orator, and as I mentioned, I have a multimedia project called All American Ruins, where I am recreating my experiences through the written, audio, and cinematic um, arts, both fantastical and non-fictional. And you can just go to allamericanruins.com, and you can also go to Instagram and just look up All American Ruins, are the two places.
Well, that was my episode with Blake of All American Ruins. If you want to check out his everything, the links are down in the description for you. Along with that, in the description, there are a bunch of Amazon affiliate links. Basically, what that means is that I've curated some products that I think you need and might want for urban exploring. And if you buy them using those links, I actually get a little bit of commission. So it's a way to help me out as a creator. I don't get paid for this podcast. I only get paid through my affiliate things such as Liquid Death and Amazon affiliate links. So if you guys want to help me out, you can do that. Otherwise, you can go pick up a photo print or some merchandise or a book at notracers.com/shop. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and feedback. Go let Blake know that you enjoyed listening to his stories if you did. And I will talk to you next week for another episode of the No Tracers podcast. If you want to come on the show, hit me up at no.tracers on Instagram or contact@notracers.com. Like I said at the beginning, I'm looking to get more rooftoppers on the show and different types of explorers. So if you know anybody, hit me up in the DMs and let me know who I should get on the show. Thank you guys. Stay strong, keep enduring, go out, go explore something, and remember, leave no trace.